This week we have a special guest with us. Michael Tefft, who is a local author, is joining us to talk about steampunk and the genre of steampunk, and what it is, because a lot of people, including myself, didn't really know what it was and what it encompasses. So I'm going to have him start out the talk. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I get asked this a lot, like what kind of books do you write? And I say steampunk, and they go, what is that? So I have a very short definition I use, which I basically say is Victorian science fiction. In getting ready for this today, I found a really good definition that appeals to me as an engineer, because it's a formula. So yes, steampunk equals mad scientist inventor with an invention of, steam or airship, metal man, or, with Baroque stylings, times a pseudo-Victorian setting plus progressive or reactionary politics times adventure plot. And this little equation came from Jeff Vandermeer in his book, The Steampunk Bible. It kind of encompasses like everything in steampunk. But like I said, the short version is that I say is, well, what I say for me, I think it involves a society with very evident class structure, sort of, Victorian or Edwardian England, or a fictional environment like that. And also advanced technology that wouldn't typically exist in that time period. So, examples like airships, clockwork automation, steam-powered computers, anything from that. So where steampunk came from is it really has its roots in the works of Jules Verne's, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, H.G. Wells, The Time Machine, War of the Worlds, and also what are called the Edison Age, which were science fiction dime novels that typically featured a young boy inventor heading west to face his destiny, usually using a steam vehicle of his own creation. And these were popular in the late 1800s. The term steampunk was first coined by author K.W. Jeter in the mid-'80s. He, along with Tim Powers and James Baylock, kicked off the rise of steampunk as a genre in the sort of mid-'80s. In 1990, The Difference Engine by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling was kind of the first steampunk book to hit it big. And it did really well. It won the Hugo Award that year. But then steampunk sort of went in fits and starts through the rest of the 90s. It didn't start taking off again as a real genre until like the late 2000s. So there's lots of different types of steampunk. They kind of fall into two ways of looking at it. Either alternative history, where just like it says, it'll be vaguely historical. However, some key event has happened, usually a rise of technology or something that has changed the historical timeline. So things are a little different. The other sort of realm is more of a fantasy realm. There's lots of books where it is a steampunk environment. There's a rigid class structure. They have airships and all sorts of technology, but it's a fantasy world in that it's a different world, different countries, sometimes elements of magic, sometimes not. So there's a bunch of different sort of subgenres within steampunk. And I got as many examples as I could. I couldn't always find a good example, but one would be boilerpunk, where the story focuses more on the lower classes in like the people shoveling the coals in the boilers that run the steampunk technology. I really couldn't find any examples of that. Most of the steampunk we see usually features more of the upper classes that are involved. Clockpunk, that's where clockwork technologies is the major technology as opposed to something like steam. Good example is the Infernal Devices trilogy by Cassandra Clare. Diesel punk, where diesel is the big technology. A good example of this is if you've ever seen the movie Sky Captain in the World of Tomorrow, that really is kind of a diesel punk kind of feel. Gaslight romance, which is typically alternative histories that romanticize the Victorian age. Manners punk, which have elaborate social hierarchies, and that hierarchy is what causes all of the friction and conflict in the story. And a good example of that is Gail Carringer's The Parasol Protectorate. And one of the last ones was Ray Gun Gothic. It's not so much maybe steampunk, but sort of steampunk adjacent. And that's sort of retro futurism based on like an Art Deco style. So a good example of that would be the movie The Rocketeer. So that's kind of a brief summary of like what steampunk is.
That's great. I mean, it's interesting because it's like a lot of things that you already think about that you don't realize maybe are steampunk. So I think that's kind of a cool thing. So some of us have read some of the books or are fans of it. Obviously, that's why we're here. So we're each going to talk about books that we've read in the steampunk genre, and I think Marie is going to go first with that. So
yeah. So first, I just want to start with, I nerd out for this stuff. I love this sort of stuff. Anybody who knows me knows I'm a history person. So put that with fantasy and like a little bit of sci-fi. It's like, I think steampunk is probably one of my favorite genres. Anybody who knows me also knows that my favorite steampunk series is one that Mike mentioned, The Infernal Devices by Cassandra Clare. So those are the books I'm going to talk about today. I'm probably just going to talk mostly about the first one, but I might talk about them as a series as a whole because it starts off more fantasy really than anything, but it gets into the steampunk-esqueness throughout the rest of the series, and it just continues on. Cassandra Clare, wonderful woman, writes really good books, I think. She has written, I think over, hold on, let me look at my shelf. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and a new one just came out. So about 17 to 18 books, because I think I'm also missing one. So she is, she's a wonderful writer. She like pumps out books every year. And this is just one of the series of hers that she is producing or has produced that is steampunk. There's another one that is her current series she's writing that's coming out. That is a continuation of these books. We start off in this book on a boat, which I feel like is a common thing for like steampunk, as Mike was saying, Victorian era. You know, how are you going to travel somewhere but by boat? And there is this American girl who her parents mysteriously died, and she had to live with her aunt for a while in America and her brother. But then her aunt dies, so she and her brother end up moving to America, England. Her brother moves way before she does, so she is basically riding on the boat by herself. But as soon as she gets there, what ends up happening is she gets kidnapped, basically. She gets kidnapped by somebody who is claiming that he has a connection to her brother. And this is the beginning of the main character of this entire series, Tessa Gray's story. Probably one of my favorite characters in any book series I've read. She's described as tall, like a bit too tall for her age and like too tall for what women were thought to be in the Victorian era. And she has what is described as like mousy brown long hair, but she has a beautiful heart-shaped face and she has gray eyes, which becomes important later. All of these details are pretty important. She's very pale and she almost looks sallow. And she gets kidnapped and taken to this place where she learns she has magical powers. Of course she does, because it's steampunk and it's fantasy and it's all of the good things about that sort of stuff. So what she is able to do is she's able to change her appearance into anything she wants, basically, but usually the appearance of dead people that she has the artifacts of. So the person who's kidnapped her is using her to kind of, use that power, get into places, and also when she takes on the image of somebody, the visage of somebody, she has all of their memories as well. So that's a main thing for the man who kidnapped her. We don't know who has kidnapped her for a while. We just know that she is with a girl, a woman. She's like not that much older than Tessa, but she's like taking care of her, I guess, who is the one. She's like the lady's maid of the house. And then there's, I can't remember his name. The footman of the house, and he's described as looking very frog-like, which is interesting. And he has big bulging eyes, and so does Miranda. And that's kind of the first giveaway of, oh, these things are probably automatons. So that's the introduction of the steampunk, of the automatons and the clockwork into this series. So it's really cool. And the two ladies who are training her how to use her power are demon-ish. And anybody who's read the Cassandra Clare books knows that demons are very important because shadow hunters, that's like the main thing in her universe. Like all of her books all take place in the same universe. They just kind of expand off of each other. And it's just, perspectives of different characters in the universe. So after a little while, Tessa figures out, because what they do is they like tie her down to her bed every night so she can't escape. One night she resolves to herself, after taking on the visage of a little girl who died in an alleyway, that she just did not want to do that again. So she gets it in her head that she's going to escape, but her escape plan is thwarted by a quasi rescue plan from quite possibly one of my favorite male characters in all of literature, William Herondale. He has probably one of the best character arcs I've ever read in a series, just in general. And he's just, he comes in the room and he's described as this young man with crazy curly dark hair and these bright blue eyes that Tessa can see in the dark. And what ends up happening is he gets into her room and she hits him over the head with her bedside pitcher. She never lives that down. He always brings it up a lot. It's very funny. But anyway, so so he ends up rescuing her. They get out, and then the rest of the series is figuring out who kidnapped Tessa, why they're doing what they're doing, and how Tessa is connected to the demonic goings-on of the evil plot of people of London that the shadow hunters are trying to root out and get rid of all of the evil that's going on. So many good characters, wonderful characters. Like I said, Tessa, Will, and then one of the other main characters is named Jem Carstairs. He is one of the things I love so much about Cassandra Clare's writing style is all of her books, no matter what day and age they're in, are very diverse, but they're still historically accurate about the diversity that would be happening. So Jem is biracial. He is half Chinese and he's half English because his mother was Chinese and his father was English. And his parents are both shadow hunters. He's another shadow hunter. And then we have the two leaders of the Institute in London. We've got Henry Branwell and we've got Charlotte Branwell, another one of my favorite characters. I love her so much. And just it's a lot of fun. I recommend these books every time somebody tells me that they like any sort of fantasy. These are almost always the first books I bring up. I'm like, have you read Cassandra Clare? And they either tell me yes or they tell me no. And when they tell me no, I say, okay, well, you don't want to start with these books because they're the prequels of the other books. Cassandra Clare's universe, you have to read them all in a specific order. So you get the Easter eggs. And her Mortal Instruments series books came out first. So those are the ones you want to read first. It's like watching Star Wars. You want to read the ones that came out first, or watch the ones that came out first, and then you want to go back, and then you want to go forward again. It's the same this way, where you want to read the Mortal Instruments, and then you want to read the Infernal Devices, and then you want to, you know, read the next series. Another thing that's important that I forgot to mention until I looked at the cover of this book is Tessa wears a clockwork angel around her neck throughout most of the series. And they later find out what is the point of that. And I'm not going to spoil it because I really think everybody should read these books. But like there's clockwork throughout this entire series. Besides just automatons, there's the clockwork angel that is ticking, ticking, ticking. And it seems to be going with Tessa's heart most of the book. And there are, there's like clockwork mechanisms, how they guard the Institute. There's clockwork, not just automatons, but like monsters. And there's all this, it's all this really cool stuff. So if you're a fan of steampunk, you haven't read these books yet, you got to do it because they're so good. So the titles of all the books are Clockwork Angel, Clockwork Prince, and Clockwork Princess. And this is Will is on the cover of the first one. Jem is on the cover of the second one. And then Tessa's on the cover of the third one. Although I will say I have the older covers because I've had these books for like 10 years, and I reread them all the time because they're just so good. And I mean, that's not a weird thing for me. Y'all know I reread books all the time, but like these are ones that I reread and I feel the same emotion and I feel like I learn something new each time because Cassandra Clare is just so good at weaving in those little details. And I cry every single time I finish the series. It's amazing. It's an emotional journey. And then new characters are added into the second book. And the storyline just gets deeper and deeper. And it's just so good. These books are just so good. I could talk about this for hours. So somebody stop me.
Okay. I did read her first series, the City of Bones, and that series. That was very good. And I always intended to go on and read the Clockwork series, and I never did. So I really should. Sounds like.
You should. They're really good.
Yeah, everyone has talked about them. I mean, anybody who likes that kind of, genre or that kind of book, the fantasy, steampunky kind of thing. So
yeah.
Cassandra
Cassandra Clare is the author that got me back into reading, like really heavily reading in middle school, because of course I was one of those kids where we grew up in our house, like we only had a certain amount of time for TV, but like we could read a book whenever we kind of wanted. And we would do family book reading like every week or something like that. I don't remember. It was every night for a while, where each of us, me and James, would both get to choose a book, and then we'd read a chapter of the book, and then we'd go through the book and we'd all read it together. But I fell off of the wagon for a little while of like devouring books. I was always one of those people who could devour, I would sit and read it in one sitting. But then I picked up the City of Bones series and it all started again for me. But that's one of the many series that this is like the series that really, really got me back into.
Those are the best kinds of series, the ones
that
actually get you back into reading. I feel like that's happened to me over my life. There are certain things that all of a sudden I decide I need to start reading more again, and I'll find something, and then I'm back into it and I'm hooked, and I got to keep reading whatever I can.
Definitely.
Well, thanks. Donna, I think you're going to talk about a book or a series that you enjoy in the steampunk genre.
Well, first of all, I read steampunk accidentally. It wasn't something I was looking for. I always enjoyed, and Mike mentioned these, the H.G. Wells, all of those, the time traveler stuff, everything like that is something, plus fantasy. And that was always something that I enjoyed. And I fell in and out of it because I'm a mood reader. Oh, today I think I feel like historical fiction. But then I caught and I also enjoy paranormal, werewolves, vampires, that kind of thing. And I love snark. So someone recommended this to me, Gail Carriger, still not sure how to say it. Soulless, and the woman on the front is the main character throughout this. I think there are 6 of these, set in Victorian England, and very much about upper class folks and clans and hierarchies, divided down into the werewolves and the vampires and Queen Victoria and her court. And so as I was reading these, and there are 6, and then there are these, I want to call them spin-offs, because they take a character out of one of the books and then they move sideways into that character's story. These are called the Parasol Protectorate. There's also the, the Custard Protocol was another one. And there's a 3rd series that I haven't really fought my way into yet, but they all are important because these are women who are protecting themselves, the Parasol Protectorate. If you've seen the movie The King's Men, it's a little like that, tiny bit. That idea that there are standards of etiquette. And then Alexia, who's the main character, accidentally kills a vampire, and they're sent out to investigate. And she was attacked by the vampire, which is beyond social etiquette. One does not do that. So then Queen Victoria gets involved, and there's unexpectedly vampires appearing and disappearing. What is happening in London's high society? And so they form what's called the Parasol Protectorate. These women train, their parasols are dangerous, they carry weapons. She marries a werewolf, also kind of a questionable etiquette, but then they all team together with the vampires. And when you talk about diversity, first of all, vampires, werewolves, humans. And then beyond that, male, female, LGBTQ, which is an interesting sort of subsection of the book. There's socially, he's a vampire, but he's gay. And so he has all these marvelous house parties because the vampires are, it's just fabulous. And that sort of, and he's the snark in the book besides Alexia and her werewolf husband. I love him. And so as I wandered through these 6 books, because of course I didn't buy them all at once, I started with the first one, I was really drawn to the characters, and just part of it was my interest in Victoria. We're all interested in Victoria's court, right? And that's kind of part of the reason we read these. But also the dirigibles, they call it floating. They all go floating in their dirigibles, but certain species can't, other species won't. So if you're going to travel, there's only 1 or 2 ways to do that, and one is by train. So you get their travels across, they even go to Egypt in one book, and they're constantly looking at things for Victoria that seem out of place. And then in the spin-offs, we still have some of those people who are still part of that system for the crown, but they're off in different places with their floating. They're floating in different places. They land and they go on board, and they go to different countries, and it's just sort of a really neat travel feel while they're looking at murder and mayhem and creating some of their own and just interfering and discovering that etiquette and protocol are important in certain ways, but not in others. What dress do you wear to the assassination? How do you carry your parasol and make sure you still have the knife in the blade, right? I mean, those are things, and yet tea time is important, unless this happens. But then you have your parasol and it's fine. So that's sort of a fun way to go about. I mean, H.G. Wells was fun too, but not in the same way. This was more, and like I said, I enjoyed the snark. The characters are fascinating. And Gail Carriger has this sense of humor that just is really appealing to me, about the different hierarchies. You can tell it's satirical. You can tell she's mocking a little bit on the etiquette and protocol that are involved in this society of women who are like the CIA or the KGB, carrying parasols and wearing the right gloves. It's just, that's a lot of fun for that. I have read The Mortal Instruments and The Infernal Devices. Did enjoy those very much. This is a little lighter take on the same thing that we're talking about. Quick, easy, fun reads. There's several other authors out there doing similar stuff, but I like Gail Carriger's. Like I said, I like the snark.
Yeah, I think I would like that part too.
It's a lot of fun, and it's quick because it's fun.
Yeah. The whole fact.
So yeah, I would say if you want a quick, fun read, right here. If you're looking for
right?
steampunk that's not, 600 pages and a lot of electricity and talking and clocks and things that are confusing.
Yeah.
Now, if you like that, go right ahead. I enjoy that sometimes too. I'm in it more for the fantasy magic stuff.
Yeah.
I would describe those books as, for anybody who's seen Stardust, it's very similar to that.
It is.
It's that kind of vibe. Also, I think something that's really important that you didn't mention is what makes Alexia so special is not also just the parasol protectorate she's a part of, but she has a specific power, right? And that's where the title of that's where the title of the first book comes from. Is she is able. She's basically a succubus, I guess, is the best way to talk about it, where she sucks the power out of people and sucks like the paranormal out of people, which is one of the reasons why her husband becomes so interested and like just infatuated with her, is because every time she touches him, he loses a little bit of his werewolf power. It always comes back after, but he loses
it never
that.
disappears.
So she has an advantage when she's fighting against monsters, because she can take away their powers just by one touch, which is really cool. That's a really cool concept that I haven't really seen somewhere else necessarily.
The idea of being soulless and Italian. That was part of the big deal too. And then her daughter is the opposite. And that's later in the series.
Cool. Wow. Yeah. This one I've heard a lot about for quite a while, and I really should read it, obviously.
Here.
Thank you. Is there a series? Did they make a series of that, like a TV or a movie series of that? No.
If they did, I don't know about it.
No, must be not. I was thinking something about that.
I feel like it would be a really good one.
Yeah, I think so. Somebody will pick it up eventually, because I do think that's one of the more popular, accessible steampunk series out there. So we'll see. So I think Mike is going to talk about, our guest here, Mike is going to talk about a book that he enjoyed.
Can I ask a question first, though?
Yes.
I'll get to Mike Tefft in just a second. The book Wicked, because now hearing all this stuff, and I only made it through the first 2 chapters of Wicked. I couldn't make it. I love the musical, and the musical has all that mechanical stuff to it, but I don't know that that's part of the book. So would Wicked be considered a punk?
Steampunk?
That is a good question.
Because I remember Donna talking about the hierarchy of the Munchkins and the Winkies and the...
And the people who go to the school even.
Yeah, there's all that.
The professors and the animals are less than the people and yeah.
And then in the musical, they definitely make it has more of a steampunk feel, because Glinda's comes down in a mechanical bubble.
And the time
whole dragon thing.
The time dragon.
the time drag.
Wicked could very easily fall into any one of the sub-genres that Mike was talking about, because there's a lot of things that are in Wicked that are very much steampunk, but then there's also that aspect of it's all fantasy. Like it's not based on historical, like a historical place or anything like that, or like a real place. Also, I think because Wicked is a spin-off of the original Wizard of Oz, I think it's definitely Wicked's intent to be steampunk-ish, at least. So I would agree with that analysis of it being sort of steampunk. Yeah.
A lot of McGuire's books are like that. They have a steampunk cast to them, but there's also something else.
Yeah, right.
There's the 4 books now that belong to the Wicked series, but he's also written about Snow White in a very different way. He's taking the fairy tales and twisting them and telling them from a different perspective.
Right.
Well, I made it through The Ugly Stepsister, which twist everything.
Yeah.
And does have that feel to it. Okay. Anyway.
No, that's a good question.
By Michael Tefft. And I'll be honest, say I wasn't looking for steampunk or whatever. I was just going to read one of my good friend's books, and I loved it. I did. Sometimes I think of it. I call it Earth Trek. Because to me, it basically they were going places on Earth, but different cultures. So you got to see the English culture, and then he travels to the Russian culture, and then you see different cultures in the second book. But again, it's that hierarchy, not only in England, but in the service. And that plays a big part. So I guess I should talk a little bit about what happens. And I'll do my best. I hope I don't
well, you've got Mike
much,
here.
Mike.
Mike can help you
well,
out.
I know. I'm going to see if I can do this justice. So Malcolm is from Scotland and is an engineer who has worked his way up through the hierarchy. And again, a lot of people appreciate how hard he's worked, but then you've got a couple of jerks up there that don't appreciate him and constantly put him down. So there's that. And so he is basically Scotty, but not really. Malcolm, in let's see if I say this right, the Daedalus, Daedalus, which is Her Majesty's airship, His Majesty's airship for Britain. And what ends up happening is he's doing his job. And because he's doing his job well, he's supposed to go up to the main deck.
Yep.
And because he's distracted by what he's doing in the ship or in the engine room, the main deck gets blown up. And 2 of the commanding officers, the captain and the next in charge, basically get blown up or blown out somehow. And so he becomes the captain of the ship, and he puts the ship back together. And there's a neat part where he basically reorganizes, like they don't have the main deck, so he has to rewire things to control the ship and to other things. And of course, right at the same time, 2 German airships come up and basically on each side of him. So he has to escape from them because they want to take him back to Germany. And of course, they're supposed to be going to Russia. And so he does a quick maneuver where he shoots straight up in the air, and the Germans end up shooting at each other. And so he escapes them, they get to Russia, and he's figured out that there is some sort of espionage going on the ship. There's somebody there because he figures out that the main deck was not blown from the outside, wasn't shot out from the outside, but bomb was on the inside and exploded out. So that there's somebody aboard who is a double agent or whatever you want to call it. And then he meets Joan in Russia. And I love the relationship between Joan and Malcolm, because they sort of get a rocky start. I mean, he's in love with her from the beginning, I think, but he's infatuated because he's not used to seeing girls with an all male ship. And also, he's always been such a mechanic engineer that he hasn't ever had enough time for women. But Joan catches his eye. And Joan at first is just supposed to be a interpreter, and you find out she's a lot more than that. And they have several fun scenes, fight scenes and other things. And one of them I was discussing earlier, where Malcolm hits her with a bedpan to defend himself. So it's a lot of fun. Also, they have another one of his characters in this is Saxon. Lieutenant who becomes second in command to Malcolm. And then there's the doctor. The doctor is the wise guy, the wise one throughout this thing, keeps reminding, because Malcolm's like, I don't want to be a captain. Again, the reluctant captain. He just wants to be in the engine room. But unfortunately, it's been forced upon him to be the captain. And the doctor talks sense into him and makes him realize the stuff. And basically that I'm rereading this and I'm enjoying rereading it. It's been a while since I read it. So that's about as far as I've gotten in the book right now. I do know they have to go on. There are aliens involved because that's what they're off to research. They don't have a lot of information. Of course, the British hierarchy is keeping the information from him. They're just telling him exactly what he needs to do. There is another British spy that comes on, Malcolm, who's very secretive, and he has his own contraption. And that's one of the big things too. Malcolm just likes to use his slide rule. That works for him, and he can calculate basically any calculation with that slide rule. Whereas the rest of the people want to use the computator, they call it, and they put the cards in. Reminded me of the days in 1983 it would have been, when I was in college doing my cards that you had to punch and then put through the thing. But he tells a story about that when he was in college and how he basically sabotaged the computators in college to prove that his slide rule was just as good as the computators. So Malcolm has a big computator that he brings along that does all the Secret Service stuff. So basically you've got a combination, again, like it seems to me like Star Trek because they're going to different places. And you've got the main deck and the flying thing. And then you've got the espionage with the spies, especially the British agents and Joan. And then the naval army, you got the airship. So definitely classic steampunk. Great books. I'm really enjoying rereading them. I look forward to the second one because I know when I got to the end of the first one, I was like, ah! But it had a good ending but I wanted the characters to go on. And actually, I know I've harassed Mike about a third one. I'm ready for the third one to come out because I really like Malcolm. I like Joan. I like Saxon. They're a good trio, and the doctor. They're a good set, and it's a lot of fun to read.
Yeah.
And actually, I have a question now for Mike.
Okay.
Because you've been talking about time periods, and I was trying to figure out is there an exact time period? I know the trouble with Germany and Russia. At first I was thinking World War II, but actually it's probably before World War I.
Yes.
Okay.
I think the first book I set in 1910.
Okay. Is there an actual date in here, or you just had that in your head?
I was vague when I wrote it about what the dates were.
Okay. And that's fine.
But it's based on the idea of one of the things the thing they're exploring is the big Tunguska explosion that happened in our world, and I'm pretty sure off the top of my head, I think it happened in 1909. So this is
True
a
event.
year later after that. So that's how I kind of frame it.
Yeah, I think Mike did a lot of, just because I know Mike, I think he did a lot of research and trying to really place it in history, even though, you know, obviously this is a little extraterrestrial almost. But there's definitely, I think he tried to tie it into real events to make it, I think it gives you a more real sense of real, like, oh, this really could have happened, even though obviously they didn't have airships in 1910, but it is a kind of that makes it very cool, I think. And I agree, Michael, the banter between Joan and Malcolm is the best part of the series, in my opinion. I love that. You know, Michael give you all the technical stuff about what's going on with the ship, and he's very good at describing it. I think it's a kind of amazing. I'm reading it going, how does he know all this stuff? And I know he does.
They've said that about Mike for years.
Yeah, well, that's true too. Don't play him in Trivial Pursuit.
No.
How does he know this stuff? I don't know.
This stuff.
But yeah, I just think that the banter and the conversation with the two of them is the best, and that carries over into the second book too. You know, the reluctant agent. There's more to come with the two of them, and it's just really a lot of fun. So even if you don't think you care about the technical workings of an airship, or maybe you wouldn't like something like you thought that was like Star Trek, I think you'll like it because of the banter and the romance that happens between the two of them. It's really nice.
Well, and the culture too, because he really does.
Yeah.
He sets the culture up in England and for Scotland,
yeah,
and in Russia. I mean, you've got all those different cultures.
Yeah.
And he talks about the different foods.
Yeah.
I mean,
he's very authentic.
He's researched a lot. I mean, you've had a lot of experience.
He does.
And even the engineering stuff isn't like way over your head. I mean, there is stuff that I didn't understand, but
right.
But
no, it's not over.
But a lot of it I did, and it plays. I mean, one of the other things that is part of his character that he does a lot in this is that Malcolm comes to realize it's not about being brawny. It's about stopping and thinking and using his head.
Yeah.
Yeah. And figuring out, because they say he doesn't look at the problem everybody else does.
Right.
So, which is it's neat how he figures out out of the box solutions.
Yep.
The solutions are really neat to see come to light.
So great. Yeah. Obviously, and we have Mike's books in our library, and they're also available ebook through the library too. So even if you don't want to come and actually pick up in a real book, you can read it online. That'd be
if
great.
you could pick a person to narrate your books, who would it be?
That's a really good question. I think so. I'll kind of cheat because I've kind of like cast the book in my head as a movie.
Right.
It's kind of changed since when I started writing, because when I started writing, I thought of Malcolm as kind of like the looking a lot like Nathan Fillion from
Sure. Mm-hmm.
Firefly. Well, now Nathan Fillion's a little too old to play that part. So I'm thinking like James McAvoy would be a good Malcolm.
I would love that. I love that, man.
Also, I could listen to him talk for hours. That would be wonderful if he would narrate. Yeah, that's so cool. That's such a good idea.
Yeah. In my head, Joan was based on Kate Winslet from the Titanic.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of now changed. If I was going to cast that now, I would want someone like, well, I mean, not to give too much away, but Scarlett Johansson would be good for Joan. I was also thinking someone there was a woman who was in Into the Badlands, the AMC fan martial arts thing, that I also think could be good for that role.
I think Cate Blanchett would have. I don't know if she's probably too old at this point, but that character, I mean, I could just see her.
hadn't thought of her, but yes, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kate Blanchett.
I know.
Oh, Maria's swooning.
I love her so much.
I mean, you
Going back
need
to-
that spunky, redheaded, whatever. I don't know. Woman of her own, with her own mind. I don't know.
Going back to what Michael said about it being Earth Trek, he's exactly right. Because I got the idea for the book from watching, it was the second J.J. Abrams Star Trek movie. And in my head, the question was, well, what if Scotty was the captain and not Kirk? And then from there, as I was thinking about it, like, obviously I'm a first-time author. Nobody's going to give me the rights to write that book in the Star Trek universe. So I thought about the best analogy, and I thought steampunk was a good way to do that. So yeah, there's a lot of Star Trek in my books.
Makes sense that you saw that, Michael.
But yeah, I'm more of a Trekkie than I am a Star Wars. So
Yeah, me too.
but yeah, it needs the thought process and
Yeah.
the cultures and the diversity and all that stuff.
So Mike, I think you had a book you were going to talk about too. So I'll let you do that.
So talking about the dense 600-page steampunk, this is it. It's The Difference Engine. It's by William Gibson and Bruce Sterling. This is the one I mentioned earlier as the big first commercial success of steampunk. So this takes place in smack dab in the middle of Victorian England. I think it's in the 1870s. I didn't catch that date when I read it, but basically the sort of premise behind this is Charles Babbage, in real history, he had built plans for what he called the difference engine, which was kind of like really the first general purpose computer kind of thing. It was a step up. He had built I think it was the analytical engine, which did a lot of basic math operations, adding, subtracting, multiplying. This was the difference engine was a step up from that. He in the real world, he never was able to get it produced and make it. And on a side note, there's a couple of computer museums that within the last, 20 years or so have actually commissioned and actually had it built.
Oh, cool.
They have working copies of these now, about 150, 160 years after the fact. Anyways, so the conceit behind this is Charles Babbage was successful in building the difference engine. And because of that, it basically started the information technology boom. And within that, there's a lot of social things that have happened. In England, there was a change of the guard where in modern history, the House of Commons is the one that controls Parliament and elects the Prime Minister, or I shouldn't say elects, chooses the Prime Minister. In the world of the difference engine, it's the House of Lords has become ascendant. And in this culture, people like Babbage and Lord Byron, the famous poet, Darwin, they've all become lords because the way to become a lord now is through scientific or technical prowess. It's not based on hereditary titles anymore. And in the backstory of this book, Lord Byron is actually the Prime Minister of England. England has ascended to be a superpower, and they already were in real history at that point, but they've been successful in stopping other countries from gaining influence. For instance, they managed to keep the United States and the Confederate States separate. So they don't talk much about the Civil War because it's already happened, and it all takes place in England. So they don't care about the Americas, but they've kept the Confederate States and the U.S. United States separate. Texas is still a republic of its own, and California is basically under the rule of the Spanish. And everything else is sort of up for grabs. The story itself takes place, like I said, in London. There's a bunch of different characters involved. It starts out with a woman, Sybil Gerard, who is fallen on hard times. Her father was part of the anti-technology revolution that was the backlash to the rise of Lord Byron and his New Radicals. That's what they were, that's what the party called itself. He was executed, and basically she lost everything and was pretty much working on the streets. She ended up I guess dating, if you will, a secretary for the ex-president of Texas, Sam Houston, and gets embroiled in a plot that involves a set of cards for the computer, the difference engines. In the first part, her boyfriend gets murdered, and she ends up fleeing to France and going in hiding. The story then picks up with a different character, Thomas Mallory, who was basically a paleontologist who had spent time in America digging up dinosaurs and basically brought the Brontosaurus, found a Brontosaurus skeleton and brought it back to England. They keep calling him Leviathan Mallory because of his discovery. By happenstance, he is at a race, a steam-powered vehicle race, which he actually ends up placing a substantial bet on and wins. It actually ends up getting a lot of money out of it. But in the course of that, he runs into some people accosting a lady. He basically chases them away, and it turns out the lady is Ada Lovelace, who is the daughter of Lord Byron and a real historical figure, also known as basically sort of the mother of computer science, because she actually had laid out a lot of the initial work in computer science. There's even a computer language named after her called Ada. She entrusts him with a similar set of computer cards to keep safe for her. Through the rest of the novel, he keeps getting pursued by various people. The Secret Service end up getting involved. And in the end, and towards the end of it, there's a huge riot in London, as London is experiencing what they call the Great Stink, where kind of what happened in London at that time, where the weather shifted and all of the pollutants from all the coal and stuff just got stuck right over London and wouldn't leave. It was very similar to that, and there was an uprising to sort of get rid of the new radicals, and he's in the middle of that. And manages to escape. He manages to get rid of the people who are trying to ruin him in the process, who want those cards back. And the story ends up with Ada Lovelace giving a presentation about one of the fundamental theorems of computer science called incompleteness theorem. But so it is a little bit me. I'll be a little honest. I had liked this book a lot when I read it the first time, and I just reread it again this time, and I really found it a little disjointed because the stories, William Gibson in general is really good at taking disparate characters with three different storylines and then having them all sort of weave together at the end. And I didn't find this weaving together very well at the end. I thought there were a lot of loose threads. So I still recommend it as a good book for getting a good feel of what specifically the alternative history version of steampunk is like. It's really well imagined. The world building in this is tremendous. Speaking as someone who wishes he'd done a better job of that, the world building in this is tremendous. So I recommend it as a good way to sort of really see what an example of the steampunk genre is.
I mean, it sounds like a huge story, honestly.
So my little paperback version here is like 430 pages. So
yeah, but in tiny print, right?
So it took me, well, I don't read like I used to, and it took me quite a while to get through this again because it's so dense.
Yeah, it sounds interesting though, the whole concept of it. But it does sound huge, like almost like I would think it would take a while to get into that world. Or maybe he's good at writing it and bringing you right in. I don't know, but it just sounds like a giant world to be introduced to.
Yeah, I mean, he introduces the backstory as needed. It's not like you have a huge ton of,
description.
It sort of falls into place as the story happens. Although
that's good.
Right near the end, there is a series of letters and newspaper articles that fills in the backstory, which that was one of the things that confused me. Is like, well, why is this at the end? I don't get it. But
when was that one written? When was that written?
1990.
Oh, okay. So it's not that old.
Well, it's 30 years old.
Well, I know, but in relative terms, to the whole genre, all books, Well, and like you said, the steampunk genre kind of came to be known in the mid 80s, I think you said, something like that. So I guess that makes sense then. So I want to thank Mike for joining us this week. And also, I didn't even mention Donna is here today too. She's a kind of a guest because she's not an employee at the library, but she is an English teacher and our friend, and we love to have her with us. But yeah, and remember, Mike's books are available at our library and on our Overdrive system. If you need to download a book for it, you can do that. And next week we'll be talking about women authors, I believe, is our topic next week. So we hope you'll join us, and we will hopefully see you sometime at the library. Thanks. Bye.